Hey y'all, welcome to Adjuster Hour. This episode is going to be so much fun. You're going to love it. We have George Codding here with NEFCO Investigations. If this is your first time jumping on Adjuster Hour, let me just give you a quick rundown. Adjuster Hour is a passion project that I started, working as a claims adjuster myself for over 14 years. I decided, you know what? Let's try to bridge the gap with education, experience, and interview some very interesting players in the industry and just try to help with that communication and learning and foster that positive experience. So, George, I'm going to turn it over to you. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
All right, thank you so much for having me here. I'm George
Yeah.
Codding. As you mentioned, I work for NEFCO Fire Investigations, NEFCO. That's a nationwide fire investigation company recently expanded to cover the 48 contiguous states. So we have about 160 or so fire investigators available really all around the country, with the exception right now of Alaska and Hawaii, which is cool because we have an 800 number.
Yeah.
No matter where your loss is, you can call somebody and have it covered.
Oh, wow. How long has NEFCO been in business, by the way?
Oh gosh, I believe it was founded in 1993, if I'm not mistaken,
Okay. So
just in the
that
New England area.
that takes a lot of time to get in all 48 or the 48 of the 50 states. That takes a while to build up and get that roster. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of work involved with that.
Yeah. So, let me ask you this. What or why did you get started in this career? What kind of gravitated you towards a fire investigations career?
Well, I have a kind of an unusual history, honestly. I am a fire investigator for NEFCO, which means I get dispatched around my area, which is actually Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. And I'm licensed in Arizona as well to
Oh,
do
wow.
fire investigations, big and small. I also sometimes go around and do some training and teaching for NEFCO, but my primary job is fire investigator. And like with so many of us, I started out in the fire service, sort of. I was a volunteer firefighter for a long time, but I
Mhm.
was also a deputy district attorney in the Denver area. And at some point, the DA said, "Well, would you want to be a legal advisor to this, what we call the arson team?" Probably not the right wording for it, since it was
Mhm.
investigating all fires. And I said, "Oh, sure, why not?" And I went to a training, and I was smitten by this profession. And I realized right then that I wanted to do it as an investigator and not just standing in the back giving legal advice. And so
Yeah.
a few years later, I switched jobs, and then I was able to just be a full time or a dedicated fire investigator for my volunteer fire department. And then it rose through a number of ranks
Mhm.
since then, being involved in a county team for the fire department, and then being involved in a state chapter of the International Association of Arson Investigators, and that's in Colorado, the state chapter. I got on the board and became president of that chapter, and then I did the same thing with the international. And so, in 2016 and 17, I was actually the president of a worldwide fire investigator organization.
Oh, wow. That's really impressive. What year did you get started? Like when was the transition?
I remember very well because the when the DA asked me to do that, there was a class that was being held in the basics of fire investigation, and that was in December of 1998. And
Oh,
that's when
wow.
I went and I realized that I was missing my calling before then, to not have been involved in the investigation field. So December of 1998 until present. And I joined NEFCO just in 2021. And before that, I
Okay.
was a volunteer the whole time.
So, if it wasn't for that first career, you would have never landed in your true fire career, which is really interesting. Kind of everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And just the fact that I was a volunteer firefighter was the only
Hmm.
reason the DA approached me with that idea.
Sure.
I'm glad I did that too. It's been a really fun ride, a really fun trajectory for me.
I can only imagine the stories and the situations you've been as a volunteer firefighter. I'm sure you have years of stories.
Oh, sure, yeah. Some of them are pretty wild times for sure. Yeah.
Do you still do them? Do you still volunteer?
No, I'm not currently a firefighter. I
Okay.
was till, gosh, just a few years ago. I actually left that
Okay.
fire department that I was attached to. As I got really busy in fire investigation and was holding down a full time job at the same
Hmm.
time, it just became to the point where I couldn't keep up on the
Sure.
training that I needed to stay with the firefighting. You've got to be honest with yourself and with your crew people, people on your engine and your
Yeah.
truck, whatever. That when you aren't practicing your skills, that it's time to step aside and let somebody else do it.
Sure. No, that's honorable of you to but I'm sure it was great while it lasted and it's a great chapter in your life, which is
Truly,
exciting. So, your career I find so interesting. I deal with fire investigators every day through my job as a claims adjuster. I believe in fire investigations. I think it's a no-brainer when you have a fire loss to get involved. So, let me ask you this. Why should why should an adjuster get a fire investigator out on a claim?
well, there's some reasons for that. I mean, I think the sorts of things that we do, maybe not primarily, but definitely a large part of what we do when we're on fire scenes is, of course, we're looking for fraud.
Hmm.
And sometimes an adjuster is just not going to know if somebody's trying to defraud them unless we're out there actually physically looking at it, of course. And then, of course, looking for subrogation opportunities as well is a
Hmm.
common goal of any first party insurance. And so we will go out there and we'll examine a scene, and sometimes we'll think of subrogation things, subrogation opportunities that maybe weren't obvious in the first place by
Hmm.
asking all the right questions, by finding out, I don't know, did the fire alarm service accurately report to the fire department or whatever. This a number of ways that subrogation could come up that that aren't necessarily obvious when you first get the call. So I think those the basic reasons that I think we all do our job on the private sector are also the reasons to want to hire a fire investigator. And I guess finally I would just say, look, you don't really know what you have until somebody's there looking at it, and not just somebody, not
Yeah,
just a field person who's able to report back to you on the amount of damages and that sort of thing, but somebody who really understands how fire starts and how fire travels and all that. I
so
certainly am with you in saying that it's a good idea when you have a fire loss to have an investigation. It can be done quickly. It doesn't
mhm.
have to be a huge deal, but then you get eyes on the scene, and I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah, there comes a point where it's too late, I feel, to call out an investigator if people start, tampering with the scene, evidence is disappearing. It
Right.
it you don't
Absolutely.
want to be on that side of the equation when
Well,
it's
that
too
really
late.
does dovetail, yeah, because if you are looking for a subrogation opportunity, then you have to be there quick and get that scene preserved. To get make sure that it's being secured, make sure that the placards are up and that sort of thing, and have somebody look for those opportunities early on before they get ruined or get removed by people, or and it isn't necessarily nefarious people. It might just be that there's that stuff is out in the weather and needs to be
Sure.
found and protected, or that the door is broken and somebody could just walk in. So that's it kind of dovetails into what I always like to tell people is why get a fire investigator involved quickly? Well,
Mhm.
those are the reasons. Get just to stop just to sort of freeze the situation, get eyes on it, and make some decisions about uh, what we're going to do next.
Do you notice, I just thought of this question, which I'm gonna just pounce it on you. Do you notice that, or have you noticed that people lie unintentionally because they're afraid to tell you what really happened?
I mean, I've certainly encountered that from time to time, both in
Mhm.
the private sector and also in the fire department. I
Sure.
literally had somebody trying to block my view of some cigarettes on a counter and tell me that they weren't smokers when in fact it was clear that there were smokers at least in the house. This was when I was on the fire department. But that's fairly intentional. A lot of times what you see is simply what a human nature will do, which is to have people cause people to relay their stories in a way that is
Mhm.
most favorable to them or that makes them feel better about what happened. Um, there's plenty of fires that are purely accidental, but that are the result of somebody doing something dumb or forgetting to take something off the stove or whatever it might be. And I'm happy to say I've never been in that situation, but gosh, it must be so
Mm,
embarrassing. And so I
yeah.
understand people are at least trying to spin or colorize their stories to their advantage. And I certainly see that sometimes.
Do you have to tell them, look, just be honest with me? It's, I'm going to find out eventually. So if you're honest with me, it can make this go smoothly.
I don't personally approach it that way, although I think that
Okay.
that, but doing it but you're right. Yes, is the
Mhm.
answer because if you can do it subtly, make sure people understand, talk to them about who they're working with, in the insurance company, how well they're being treated, that sort of thing. And it's generally they're very very positive reflections of that will help people to at least understand. Okay, I'm in friendly hands here. When I
Sure.
first told somebody, "Hi, this is George. I'm a fire investigator. I want to come look at your house."
Mhm.
People are understandably a little bit wary and a little bit reticent to want to get involved. Um,
Sure.
but once I meet them and once we start having those discussions, a lot of times that'll warm people up, and then ask questions in a nice subtle way, but in a way that gets those answers. So yeah,
Not like me.
you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Maybe not directly. It depends on,
Mhm.
I guess, who you are and what the situation is. But yeah, absolutely. And people do warm up. At least in my experience, I'm there for half an hour or an hour and find
Sure.
something in common we can talk about, and then pretty soon we're having a good conversation, and then I'm getting a lot more information.
Of course. You have to warm them up.
Yeah,
So when you first go out or when you make that first call with the insured, are they immediately put on guard that, oh wow, this is a fire investigator coming out, and they're nervous, or do they understand it's just part of the process?
yeah. I get nervousness up front. The first problem though is not that they're worried about a fire investigator coming. I think that a
Mhm.
lot of people explain, a lot of insurance folks explain to their insureds, like, look, this is kind of a routine thing, and I certainly do.
Sure.
But when they first get a call, they've been getting a bunch of phone calls from a bunch of different people, and some of whom are not necessarily legitimate, like
Yeah.
people that have been following the police scanner and are trying to get their foot in the door to do like restoration or whatever it might be, or just illegitimate or fake calls or calls that put them on guard. And so I like to joke right up front. I bet been getting a lot of phone calls about this.
Mhm.
And of course, I send them my card right away. I let them know who the adjuster is that retained me so that they'll understand, oh, okay, this person is a legitimate part of the process.
Yeah. Okay. Just wondering. I had a claim before where an insured was using a smoker and the smoker caught fire, but they didn't want to tell me that they were cooking because they felt,
Yeah,
as it wouldn't be covered if they, were found
right.
not guilty but responsible for the oh, the term blew on me.
Yes.
Okay.
So
It's
here
okay.
you find I didn't click anything over here.
No, that's okay. All right. So, is there ever a situation where an insured, I'm sorry, where an adjuster should not call a fire investigator out, or is it always welcomed?
I mean, that's a decision that really relies on the economics of the
Mhm.
company involved, and the scale and the size of the loss. So I don't really necessarily recommend anybody to not call a fire investigator. I mean, sure, maybe it's a really small fire and maybe you've got a lot of information and some photos about what happened. I mean, one could certainly imagine a fire that's so small that it doesn't really make sense economically. But
Sure.
if you're involved, that means the fire probably is of some size, and then I think that just triggers you know, the idea of we probably should have somebody look at it, and the fire investigator is probably the best position to do so and to make sure that it is what it seems like it is. So I don't
Yeah.
really have any, other than what the company's economics and protocols are. I don't really have
No,
any
that's a good
line
point.
that I can draw. Yeah,
That's a good point. I always feel when I get a new claim in, I don't trust the description, or I don't trust what the insured's telling me. So they may allude to, oh, it was just a simple fire, or just, this happened, or they tell me, oh, it's a devastating fire, everything's destroyed. And then we go out and it's a different story.
true.
So my advice for all claims adjusters is to get a fire investigator out the minute you have a fire because you truly don't know the circumstances surrounding that fire that could have led up to that cause. It could be, like you said, subrogation opportunities. It could be more than what meets the eye or more than what's being said. And you can never go back on the situation. Once it's done, it's done. You've lost your opportunity. So that's my advice for everyone listening out there. And of course, George mentioned that as well. But I want to talk about what can adjusters do to help make your job easier. So that's either the desk adjuster or the field adjuster. What can be done?
Well, I guess a couple of things. I mean, communication is always super important, of course, and we're always talking about this and in any meeting, in any discussion like this. We like to have a lot of information, I think, and so to the extent you can get information, I find that super useful. Um, and when you talk to the insured, you're getting a statement that happens really early on,
Hmm.
oftentimes in the event, and then maybe we're not there for 24 or 48 hours, and that's only after we've been retained, obviously, and assigned. So there can be some time that passes between when you talk to them and when we do, and the earlier the better for getting information. A
Hmm.
statements made, one as an attorney, I guess, or an attorney who's now retired, I would say, statements that are made closer to the time are believed to be more reliable because the people making the statements haven't had the time to think about stuff and maybe decide what spin to put on what they're saying, or how they might benefit, or how what they're
Hmm.
saying might detriment them. So your information is super helpful. Passing that information on, of course. Making Paving the way is good. And as I mentioned before, I'll call somebody and I'll immediately mention who the adjuster is and the company and so on, in an effort to make sure that the people understand that I'm there for a legitimate purpose and I'm not just trolling like so many others.
Sure,
So
sure.
if you can set that up, make people understand that it's a routine thing that the company does, I think that really helps us as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point is setting the expectations for the insureds, letting them understand that you will be coming out, you are doing a routine investigation, and then getting that first recorded statement with the insured is so important again to lock in those details like you said and to understand where do we go from here. So if I hear an appliance maybe has been damaged, maybe I do want to just get evidence retention started. Maybe maybe I should be doing that. Or um it, maybe it was arson. Okay, well now I have to get SIU involved, or someone else did it. Someone else was caught on camera, which that happens. We'll get video evidence that a homeless individual or some type of individual, a vagrant, I don't know, just someone passing by sets the structure on fire. Okay, well I need to be in touch with the fire department, I mean the police department. I need to be privy to the investigation. I need to see what's going on. So that's so important in that call. And the insured is your first chance of gaining as much information for your file. So you are privy to, okay, what steps I need to take. So no, I agree
That's
completely.
excuse me. Yeah, that's well put. And it actually leads me to say, if you have, when you're in the conversation with the insured, another great thing, if that's appropriate in however your company works, is to let them know that there is a possibility that the scene won't be ready to be cleaned up as soon as the fire investigator goes out the door, because maybe we
Hmm.
had to hold the scene for potential subrogation. Maybe a joint scene exam is next, and so therefore we have to hold on to the scene, and maybe they can clean up other parts of the building, but we have to leave some of it intact, et cetera, et cetera. So that is something, speaking to insureds, that I oftentimes will get kind of an expression of surprise or disappointment. Is like, look,
Hmm.
if I don't, if the adjuster tells me to, or if I can't even reach the adjuster tonight because we're in the West and I'm calling back East, then we'll have to put up that tape and just hold on to the scene until the adjuster releases it. And there is a possibility we might have to hold on to it for a while. I know sometimes that can be disappointing to people. So I guess to the extent that you all can inform them of that too, and that
Hmm.
that's also part of routine business and it's also important to the insurance company, then I think that would be helpful too.
Of course, especially if we know that there is subrogation potential and they have a large deductible, that's something that's financially beneficial to them, which would be a motivating factor for them to retain that equipment or that scene. Which I know it's hard. You wanna get everything inspected and then okay, let's go ahead and start doing the repairs. And unfortunately, it's not always that simple. Fire investigations can be very complicated, especially if you discover um, evidence of, okay, maybe there was an accelerant. Tell me a little bit about that. What happens when you're on scene and you find some type of accelerant and you're like, hold the phone, we gotta dig deep.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it kind of depends on the situation that comes up because if the fire department has been there or the police department and
Mhm.
they've been working on the same situation, then you don't have to call the authorities or anything like that.
Okay.
Then it becomes an issue of, at some point, obviously, we're going to have to figure out why the accelerant is there. Is it indicative of somebody having tried to start the fire? And that is all a matter of broad context, and that has to do with
Hmm.
all of the investigation and all of the information we get. And then it would, potentially relate to, okay, well, who was the person that did it? Because if it's a non-insured or if it's somebody from the outside, then I suppose you could think of it as a subrogation
Hmm.
possibility. Oftentimes, a situation like that, the person who would be responsible is probably not going to have a lot of resources to subrogate on, unless they happen to have some insurance or something that probably wouldn't apply.
Sure.
But if it's internal, then obviously there could be issues of fraud, there could be coverage issues, and so on. And so it really all is going to depend. But we do our job essentially the same. Certainly, if we find
Hmm.
something like that, and if it's in a spot that we think might be potentially related to an incendiary issue, then we'll try and collect some of that evidence and get it off to a lab and have them test it and that sort of thing, and then regroup and put our heads together and
Sure.
decide what the next step is. And it really does depend on so many of those different factors.
It's got to be a little awkward
Yes,
if
yeah,
you
for
if you
sure.
get yourself in that situation.
Yeah. I'm going to turn my camera on, off and on again, just in case that's what's
Sure.
making the blue screen.
It is very blue.
It
It
doesn't
must
seem to.
be.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. That's no
Yeah.
problem because I can
See.
still see you. You just are
Okay.
very blue, like the song. So
Yeah.
you're
Right.
good. So let me ask you a little bit more about the investigation part. What is your process? There's got to be some type of method to that madness.
Right. Yeah. I really enjoy describing the method to people, especially folks that we work for, adjusters and so on, because they will eventually potentially get a written report depending on whether they ask for one or not, or
Hmm.
even just a verbal report. And it really does follow certain protocols. And these protocols are baked into the industry now. And they're ones that really everybody's supposed to follow. And so, for example, if you see a written report in it, it goes all around a building that had a fire and it talks about the front and then the left and then the rear.
Hmm.
And it seems so like overkill. And it's really not. And it's us following a very specific procedure that we are expected to do every time. And just that systematic approach is part of what's required of fire investigators. There's a book that came out, started in 1992, from the National Fire Protection Association, which publishes all sorts of codes and standards, including the electrical code. And they convened a committee, and all these books are written by committees, and wrote this book. And it says it's a guide, but over the years it's become a standard, and that's one of the things that's in that book, the systematic approach. And so you'll see us working from outside to in. We'll making sure
Hmm.
that we're looking at the load center, the circuit breakers, and so on, doing all those things in kind of a systematic fashion. But also we do. The book is very clear that we follow the scientific method, and the scientific method is something that, of course, comes from way in the past. Scientists have been using it for a long time, and but it's your people in the fire investigation field are not necessarily scientists. In fact, most of them are not. I have
Mm,
a friend in the Denver area who's on the fire department, and he happens to be a scientist. And it's wonderful in his fire investigation because he has a very scientific way of looking at everything. Sometimes it's aggravating, but mostly it's great. But most of us don't have the benefit of that background. And so,
sure.
really important for folks to be trained in the application of that method. And that's certainly required by the book as well. It's called NFPA 921, and it is the dominant book in the fire investigation industry in the United States. I've also taught and spoken in Latin America and
Oh, wow.
other. I speak French and Spanish and some Portuguese, and so I've had the great pleasure of teaching in other places, and particularly in Latin America. And the book is really strong there as well, and the NFPA is as well. So, um,
Okay, that's interesting.
but just to not digress too much, NFPA
No,
921 does
please.
okay. It doesn't require us to follow the scientific method, and we do it both in our determination of the origin of the fire, and again
Mhm.
in the determination of the cause. And so there's another place where you might see, a very specific following of specific procedures in the report or in the verbal report. So the investigator is expected to determine the origin of the fire before he or she determines the cause. The origin is obviously where did the fire start, and the philosophy being, I guess this is obvious too, that you don't know how the fire started unless you know where. And if you don't know where, you're likely to mess up on the how. And so that's one of the things in the book. And the scientific method is really important for, I mean, I think that the hallmark of the scientific method, if you ask me, the way that it's presented to fire investigators is theories or
Mhm.
hypotheses. So you'll see us reviewing all of the possible hypotheses or all of the credible ones as to where the fire started, as to the origin of the fire. And sometimes we'll go
Yeah.
through, actually review them, and actually discuss them with each other if we're working in groups, or do that kind of the mental review if you're not. And then again for cause, then we're going back through again, and we are running through all of those theories, all of the viable
Mhm.
hypotheses about what might have been the cause of the fire, and then working on each one. The idea behind the scientific process is that you're trying to knock down your favorite theory, and that's how scientists work as well. So if they have a theory about what happened and they think, oh, this is probably it, then one of the most important things for them to do is to try to disprove the theory, to try to knock it down. And that's how
Okay.
scientists wind up with theories that are stronger and more viable, is because they're, I guess, honestly, for lack of a better word, trying to negate them, trying to shoot them down in any way they can. Makes them stronger if they can't be negated, and then it allows the investigator to come back in the case of fire investigation and say, I really went at this theory from all different angles, and it really is holding up, whereas the other theories failed for the following reasons.
So I love that because it has to be the same for every single, it's a scientific method, so it has to be the same for every single fire you go out.
Right.
It alleviates that room for error because you're following the manual, you're following the guidelines to a T. And even though it may be exhaustive, it's the right thing to do because you have to get all those facts collected before you can make your determination into the fire. I um I get calls, the investigator will call me on site or they're leaving and they'll go, "Okay, I can't rule out X, Y, and Z," or whatever the case may be.
Right.
And so that gives me insight now. That's why they're saying that they can't rule this out. They have to do the scientific method and go through each, right? Each possibility.
Right. No, that's absolutely right, and that helps us in, as you said. I think you hit the nail right on the head.
Mhm.
Following that process helps us try not to make mistakes, because now we're
Sure.
looking at everything and reviewing every possibility, trying to avoid that kind of that temptation to want to just zoom in on the theory that
Zoom
we want.
in.
Um, but
Yeah.
yes, that's exactly right, and that's exactly why we're speaking in those terms. It's like that something we can't rule out. Well, it's important, I guess, from
Mhm.
a scientific standpoint, but it's also important from the legal standpoint,
Of
because
course.
obviously, if you have determined that a certain appliance, for example, potentially is defective or something happened with the appliance to cause the fire, and that there's a subrogation opportunity there. Well, certainly when you make that claim, the appliance people or the seller or whoever it might happen to be, one of the very first things they're going to do is they're going to look in that report to see what other theories are still viable, right? If you've got the possibility of, for example, smoking, maybe there was smoking materials right in the area or something, certainly somebody's going to want to raise that as a defense and say, well, you're saying that it's my coffee maker, but there's a smokers here as well, or you're saying
Mhm.
it's my neighbor did something, but what about these other theories? If they haven't been ruled out, then how can you prove that my person is actually responsible for this fire? So it really it behooves everybody to follow this
Mhm.
method to really consider all the possible theories. And there are many theories. I tell people in a classroom setting, I say, and we can talk about this too, with the elements of cause. We need the heat source, we need the first fuel, and then we need to know how they came together, right? There's the three elements of cause
Yes.
that are described in this book as well. And I say to people in a classroom setting, I say, if you look around, I mean, we have all kinds of heat sources here, really. I mean,
Mhm.
the lights, the power plugs, the computers, the lithium ion batteries, etc. And we have all kinds of possible fuels, the desk, the chairs, and so on. But nothing is on fire. Why not? Well, because um, nothing has brought them together yet,
No, that's
but if you juxtapose them all in your area of origin, for example, and some people will do this in a chart, all the heat
Mhm.
sources up here, all the fuels down there, and then you start filling in all those boxes, you'll realize right away that there are many possible theories to any fire, and you just need to really think it through and really, even if it's a little bit far fetched, let's go ahead and think about it anyway. Well, did something focus light on this place? Is this like a makeup
Mhm.
mirror that caused a fire? That was a really interesting fire that I worked one time on the fire department. Well, okay, no, okay, great. Why not? Well, let's decide why not. Well, there's no makeup mirrors, or whatever those things are. But let's go ahead and think about all the possible theories because we know that somebody else is going to be doing it later and using it against us.
Absolutely. So, what happens that results in an undetermined conclusion?
Well, undetermined is it's really difficult on the fire department if you're out there doing the investigation. You come back to the fire station and everybody's cleaning the hose and they all were out fighting fire. It was all very exciting and they want to know what started the fire. And it's always been, I don't know, difficult to say, look, the fire is undetermined, and that's a legitimate and an honest response,
Mhm.
and a legitimate determination. We all want to know what started the fire, but if we're not ready to make the determination, then we really do have to say that it's undetermined. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be determined in the future, right?
Sure.
More data could be gathered. That's one of the steps of the scientific method, is to gather that data, create the or form hypotheses, and then test them out. And it may be that we eventually get to the theory that that holds water, and that is our cause of the fire. But in the meantime, it is undetermined. So, for example, if we don't have enough evidence, preponderance, 50% or
Mhm.
more at least, weight of evidence to be able to say that this is our cause, for example, then it is undetermined at this time. Similarly, if we have two viable causes that haven't been ruled out, well, then it has to be undetermined as well. We don't get to just blindly
Mm,
pick one of the two if there's
okay.
strong enough evidence to support the other one as well. And then, of course, just a lack of data sometimes does hinder any kind of investigation, and certainly could hinder a fire investigation. And so those are how we could wind up with undetermined fires. And as I always tell the folks at the fire department too, that doesn't mean that it will be undetermined forever. That just means that that's the appropriate
Sure.
ruling for right now.
So, undetermined is not necessarily, and I'm going to just say it in this wording because I don't know a better way to say this. Undetermined is not a result of a failure. It's a result of maybe multiple opportunities or possibilities that caused the fire.
Absolutely right. I couldn't have said it better. It feels weird to have to say it, but there are
Mhm.
times you just can't make a determination. And those are all the situations that I mentioned. And then just the lack of data, too. Some fires still can't be determined. Just
Sure.
we just haven't been able to determine them. And I think that this the straightforward thing to do is to just make that clear. If it's truly undetermined, then just say it and stick with it. Sometimes you just can't, and there's a million reasons why, obviously you can't. I've been to
Of course.
scenes that have been cleaned up, or people have been through the scene long before the fire department because it was unsecured, or many many different reasons why a fire just might not be amenable to be determined. We certainly do our best and try our hardest to do that, but we have to, of course, follow the process when we do, and when the process results in us, like you said, having multiple hypotheses that haven't none of them has risen to that level, or lack of data or whatever it is, then maybe we just have to call it undetermined. But yeah,
Okay.
it's an absolute possibility, and anybody working in fire, of course, has seen it numerous times.
Yeah, I've seen it several times on claims that I've handled, and it's always like a sigh of, "Oh, man, I wish we knew, I wish we could get that," but in the end, you do the best you can. You don't want to make something up. You don't wanna just guess. You wanna be determined because, like you said, legally, you can't just it's not gonna hold up in court either if you're on the stand and go, "Well, I took my best guess.
Yeah,
This is what could happen." So, you have to do it the right way, even though it seems harder sometimes. You always have to do things the right way.
agreed.
So, I want to point out, you said something very interesting that I have been shouting from the rooftops. Can you clear up the debate for us, the O&C versus C&O? You mentioned it a little bit, but I want you to reiterate to everyone that's listening, what's the correct way to say it?
Oh, I most certainly can. Yes, it's O and C. A lot of people, especially people that have been in the field for a long time, will say C and O. It just sounds
Mhm,
snappy, I guess. But what it stands for when you say it that way, if you're talking about getting a
mhm,
fire investigator involved, is cause and origin. Now, we all, hopefully, since 1992, and certainly when the book was first developed, and certainly into the modern age, know better. We all know
yeah,
that origin is done before cause, and the investigator must work on origin before they work on cause. And so, saying the expression "C and O, cause and origin," is it harmless? I don't think so. And I always tell
no,
people, no, let's get the terminology correct. It's O and C, because that just helps to reinforce the idea that
mhm,
origin becomes before cause. That helps to reinforce the idea that we're not being, I guess, frivolous or sloppy about how we think about these things. And so, yeah, I always say it's O and C, and I still kind of cringe a little bit when I hear C and O, and I totally
yeah,
understand. It, excuse me, it comes from past,
yeah,
and we know that the people that are saying it are not expecting the investigation to go that way.
sure,
That
sure,
they're not expecting the investigator to do something upside down like that. But I
yeah,
always suggest to people, look, just say it right, because you're
mhm.
you're showing that you understand. You're showing that you adhere to and follow the appropriate protocols.
I think you cleared that up. That was lovely. I feel validated.
Absolutely, you should be.
I feel good. I feel good about that. So let's shift gears a little bit. What else do you do during your downtime when you're not investigating fires?
Well, do you mean like for the company, or just like literally off?
Yeah. No, both.
Oh,
Both.
okay.
I know
Well, I
you're
just
involved. You're involved in a lot of extracurricular activities that, you
well,
know.
there's yeah. Well, there's a lot of work when you're not on a fire, of course, because a lot of
Mhm,
clients will ask for reports. You can if you want. You don't have to with us. Obviously, we're not gonna spend the time
sure.
to do one if you don't want it, or maybe it's just verbal only. But we do reports, of course. Bring in all those photos and get them uploaded into our system so they're safe and in a permanent record and so on. Same with the notes and things like that. And there's lots of investigative follow up things to be done sometimes,
Mhm,
like July 4, I got a number of fires, and a couple of them are going to require me to go knock on some doors in a neighborhood and get more information about who was doing fireworks and that sort of thing. So,
mm,
the follow up, looking for recalls on products that we might have found on the scene. Just a lot of things that we need to do to behind the scenes, to not just investigating out in the fire. And then, of course, if you're located a place like I am, which is in the Four Corners, you've got to drive. Every time you get
Mm.
called, you're going to be driving many, many hours to get to a scene, unless it happens to be in your little town. So that's what I do for work. And then on the off time, I happen to do some broadcast radio. I have a reggae show in the Denver
Oh,
radio station that I'm now uploading from this area since the pandemic, when I moved away from the Denver area. Still continue to upload and do spots and things. And I'm in a band.
oh,
Yeah,
that's
I sing.
amazing. I did not know. When I asked that question, I had no idea.
That's been my big thing, my big extracurricular these days, because it's been just a wonderful. I play, rock covers mostly, and some originals with
Mhm.
some really great, really talented people. So it's just been a major event for me. So it's a
Well,
happy
that's
time
a
for sure.
yeah, that's a good way to decompress
Yeah,
from I mean, investigating a fire, I feel like it's high pressure because everyone's waiting for you to give them the answer. Like we were talking about, what is that result? And to
absolutely,
just get away and to play in a band. I mean, do you sing or do
I do.
you sing?
I'm
Oh
not
my
the
gosh.
not the lead singer. I just have some out of our 40 or 50 song repertoire that we've worked up
Mm,
so far. I probably sing 5 or 6. So we have a very
wow.
lead singer that I will never be like her. So, but it is a wonderful opportunity for sure.
I
And
love
yeah,
that.
fire investigation. You're right. People are. A lot of people are waiting for the outcome. I mean, you are there. You're the point person making that determination based on your training. So yeah, it can be a little bit stressful to think about it in that fashion. I mean,
Of
not
course.
only the adjuster that retained you, maybe there's an attorney involved, and of course she wants to know what's going on, and not to mention, of course, the insureds and the clients who are there. I mean, if I had
Mhm.
an event as devastating as a fire in my house, and thank goodness I have not, I would really, really want to know what caused it. And maybe especially if I wasn't a fire investigator, I'd be like, what happened here? Maybe I know, maybe I don't, but I definitely would want to know. So, yeah, so that's a bit of pressure on the investigator for sure. Lots of
Sure.
expectations, and just another reason to remind ourselves of, okay, here's our process. We're going to
Mhm.
follow the process, and we're going to, go through the steps that are required by the documents that control what we do.
So I have a weird question for you. Socially, so you're out and about, you're away from work, you're after hours, maybe you're at a gig. Do you go places and do you like constantly see fire hazards? Do you go, oh, that's a fire hazard? Like, are you paranoid or not paranoid, but ultra aware of that?
Yeah, somewhat. And I don't have the background. Some
Mhm.
people come from the fire department where they were the codes people. They were inspecting all of the
Sure.
hazards. Like, you've got two or three extension cords together, or your power strips and the daisy chained, or this door
Hmm.
is blocked, or whatever those things are. And I didn't have that background. And some of the people that I know that do are very, very intense about fire safety issues. But yes, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I think about things that I've seen, and like I will never
Mm.
put anything combustible on the stove because I've got
Sure.
two relatively large dogs, and I know better because
Mm.
unfortunately, I've seen the damage and the destruction that have come from a dog turning on the stove. Craziest thing,
Wow.
or whatever. And so, yeah, I definitely notice those things all the time. I get a lot of flack for it. Hey, that shouldn't be that way, I'll say in a public place.
Yeah.
Somebody will say, oh,
Yeah.
stop already.
So I do that. I go into one's house and I'm like, this is this needs to be repaired or this is failing or this needs maintenance or this smells like mold. I can't go to a restaurant if I smell mold. I'm like I'm out of here.
Yeah,
So it can be it can be a headache because sometimes being naive is a blessing
can be
where
easier.
you're not. It could be easier.
Yeah.
But so talking about speaking of the dog that caused the fire, what has I know this is a hard question, but what has been the most interesting fire you've ever been to?
Oh gosh, well that was pretty interesting. I remember because, and this I've taken with me throughout my whole career. You don't know what
Mhm.
you don't know. And
Sure.
I had some experience, and here I am on the fire department getting called out to a county call, somewhere outside of my agency because I was on a county team as well, and finding a fire and working with other people. We dug it in. It was not a huge fire. We were able to get to the stove, and there was nothing there to be an ignition source on the stove itself, except that the stove was on, and the right questions were asked, and we determined that the dog was tall, and the homeowner had stored something on the stove like baskets or something, but there was also
Oh,
some food there, and the dog had turned the stove on, and I was floored. I was like, wow, I've never heard of this before. But I mean, and I think in the business we know that that's a real possibility. If you do that on
sure.
to the internet and search for movies and images of dogs starting stove fires, you'll see plenty. So that's
Wow.
very impactful to me. Another one that I think I alluded to was a fire up in an A-frame home, like on the second floor, and again a fire that was we on the fire department were able to pretty much narrow down where it started, and there was nothing there. And then the brightest among us, which happened to be that scientist I mentioned a while ago, found a makeup mirror in the rubble, and he asked the teenager. Everybody was kind of staring at the teenager, like, "Okay, what are you doing up here? That's could have caused a fire." And she told us where the makeup mirror was. The house was standing well enough, and the very next day we came back at the very same time, placed the makeup mirror back in that position. The window was still intact, and it started a fire for us. And
Wow.
just gave me chills to have this happen. I was like, wow, the benefits of experimentation for one thing. Another case for me of you don't know what you don't know, and of course, over here everybody's sort of wondering whether this teenager might have done something intentional or something that she was hiding or secretly smoking or whatever
Sure.
those things are. That was really impactful to me, and I've brought that with me throughout my career. Is like don't assume. And of course,
Mhm.
the book talks the 921 book talks about, they call it bias, like expectation bias, like you're expecting something and therefore you're only looking for that and gathering evidence of that and that sort of thing. But it's a deep down sort of personal thing to want to just get a conclusion and be comfortable with it and be done. And so I really learned
Sure.
that day, and I've learned all the way through my career. It's I've been doing it for about 26 years. I'm listed as the author of a textbook, and there was a lot of it was a rewrite authoring and writing some new chapters and things. But
Oh, wow.
and out of all that, I feel like I'm still learning absolutely every
Mm.
day.
Oh, yeah. I'm learning in my career every single day. It's a new claim. I'm learning a new lesson or ways of doing things, and it's exhausting. But I wanted to mention too, like you were saying, you know, in cop shows or um, similar, I always hear the term, don't get tunnel vision, or you got tunnel vision, or the cops are like fight with each other. You got,
Right.
um, is that similar? Have you been in a situation where tunnel vision is a real thing?
Oh, sure. I mean, I like to think that I avoid it myself, but
Mhm.
learning how to check yourself and how to force, if you will, force yourself to consider those theories and make that chart
Okay.
is a good way to get around that. But yeah, I remember being in a in a fire not too long ago, and this was again a fire department fire, not a company fire, but it was in a very small room, and the patterns were so clear that the fire started on the table across from the washer and the dryer. And I mean, it was to me it was patently clear, and it couldn't have been clearer. But I was working with a person who was also a fire marshal, and he went right to the dryer and he said, "Well, there are so many dryer fires, and maybe it was the lint, and all the different." And that was a tunnel vision that I like to say that I wasn't guilty of at that point. And so I just had to have a talk with him, and I said, "Okay, do you see this pattern? Do you see that pattern? And what does that mean? And do you really think?" And this is a logical exercise, I guess. Would we really see those patterns if the fire had begun with a dryer? And if so, or if you had lint or whatever, then what patterns would you see? It pretty quickly convinced him that the fire started across from those things. In fact, it was a fire in some lithium-ion batteries that were
Mhm.
charging on the
Oh,
table across from the washer and dryer. And once that was realized, the fire became a lot clearer to everybody. But
do
yeah,
you
so it does
see?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
I'm
the
sorry.
remedy, I'm sorry, and the remedy is to make sure you follow the right steps.
Do you see a lot of the lithium battery fires? I feel like that's such a thing.
Yeah, lithium ion battery fires are, I mean, they're so, they make the news a
Mhm.
lot, and they big spectacular fires, and there are quite a few fires that fire investigators run into involving lithium ion batteries. Um, but two things to keep in mind about that. One is that there are zillions of lithium ion batteries out in the world, and most of them are never going to fail and never going to
Mm,
start a fire. When they do, of course, we investigate, we respond, and potentially there may be a subrogation case there, just depending on what's happened. But the other thing about lithium ion batteries that's super important is the context of their involvement, because it's super common to find lithium ion batteries in a fire that have exploded, that have vented out their electrolyte. Their little foil is maybe sitting around because they've had that event, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they were the cause of the fire.
mm,
If these batteries are involved in fire, if they're caught by the flame and so forth, that came from somewhere else, then
sure.
there's a possibility as well that they will explode, vent, and catch fire. And so, lithium-ion batteries are certainly part of that landscape for us now. But it's really important when you see those to really look at the context of, well, is this battery or battery pack, is it in the origin of the fire? Is it the cause of the fire, or is it simply the victim of the fire?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I No, that's great. It's something to consider with the being a victim of the fire. I
Right.
just you hear about it in the news, like you said, all the time. So I was just wondering about that. So thank you for sharing that. We have two questions for you. Um, should we always request a fire report, a fire investigation report? Like, should we always request a report from the fire investigator?
No, I don't recommend that. It's completely going to be up to the context again, your protocol, your procedures. There are plenty of folks in the insurance industry that don't ask for a full report right up front, and that's fine. They get a verbal
Mhm.
report. We talk about it if they understand it well enough. We provide DocuSketch 360 pictures, and so there's a lot of information that comes to you. And it may be that you don't need a report or don't want a report, and that's perfectly fine. The
Okay.
other context would be is sometimes if it looks like it's going to involve attorneys, sometimes those folks will say that they don't want something in writing yet, that it's not time.
Oh,
So yeah, that's entirely up to your company and your protocols.
okay. Let's end on this question. I think this is a great one to end on. What is your favorite part of your job?
Oh man, there's two of them because I get to do. I got involved in fire investigation back when I told you about kind of the early days,
Mhm.
because I was a prosecutor, so I was an attorney, and I knew about the law, and I thought it was really interesting, and how police do things, and fire investigators are included in there. But it's also scientific, and I found that to be totally fascinating. And it also involves, I don't know, things like building construction, and I find that interesting. And it also involves, so many different aspects. It was like my police experience played into that really nicely, my interview experience and all that. And so altogether, it was such a cool compilation of skills and of excitement for me. And so it really was a huge assortment of things that got me interested. But I think two things really for me. One is just the technical aspect, like we were talking about those batteries, and I've dug
Mhm.
in and done a lot of research on them, and I like to present about them to people, and I know how they're made up, and I know how the failure modes go, and I find that technical stuff really, really, really cool. And the other is just the people. I mean, I really enjoy working with the insurance adjusters. I really enjoy being out in the field, meeting people that have
Yeah,
been in situations, and maybe contributing a little bit to making them feel at ease, or making them feel as you do, that they're being taken care of, and that things are going to be okay. So I think it's
of
it's a
course.
two-part answer, I guess.
No, that's great. I can tell that you're very passionate about your career, and it seems like it's a good fit for you.
I
So, do you see yourself? So that was the last question. Do you see yourself? This is what you're retiring on. You're doing this until the day you kind of hang up your working years.
I really do. Yes,
That's
absolutely. It's
awesome.
you know it's part of the trajectory of a lot of fire investigators go from public sector to private sector. And as I dig in and get deeper into this job, I've really come to enjoy the private sector work. I
Mhm.
know a thing or two about insurance from a prior career also. I find that really interesting. And I mentioned a lot of other things. The NEFCO people in particular have been really wonderful to work for. Um, the investigators and the management and the folks at the office that you call with that 800 number and so on, all been really, really great.
That's
So,
awesome.
yes, absolutely.
Well, George, thank you so much for being a part of this tonight. I really appreciate your time. This was so great. I feel like I have a better understanding and respect for the fire investigator, and that they are a wonderful tool for us to utilize in the claims process, and I mean, what is it? Invaluable tool that you guys bring so much expertise and knowledge, and without you guys, we couldn't do our job on the adjusting side. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and conclude. I do want everyone to know, listen, getting your CE courses and classes ahead of time is the way to go. Okay? You don't want to be last minute. I always say it's best to get your CE classes, your CE credits in person. So going to the conferences, hearing from people like George in person, going to those in-person classes or webinars, learning from these experts is the best way to go. However, if you can't and you're in a bind and you need to get freshened up on your knowledge, go to adjusterpro.com, use adjuster hour 10 and save 10% on your adjuster pro courses. So with that being said, George, thank you so much. Everybody have a good night. I will see you guys next Thursday. Good night.